The Venezuelan capital is pitch black, and it's not from a probable infrastructural collapse this time around. This one is the full might of the USA's military boots raining down heavily on Venezuelan soil. By 3:30 a.m., the presidential journey was over for Nicolás Maduro, the sitting president of a sovereign nation. Maduro was zip-tied, sitting on the USS aircraft with his wife Cilia Flores next to him. There hasn't been any successful trial or extradition hearing yet. It's just hard American power doing what it does best when the gloves come off. And I need you to understand something right now before we go any further, that this isn't about drugs nor is it about democracy. It's not even really about Maduro. This is about what happens when an empire realizes it's losing control of the architecture that made it an empire in the first place. And Venezuela, the state sitting on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, which happens to be the largest in the world, just became an example. So let's talk about the discrepancies that the governments and the press are not fully deliberating publicly. They're calling it Operation Absolute Resolve. And Trump standing right there at the epicenter because of course he is, talking about how Maduro had one last chance to surrender during a phone call a week before the raid. "You got to surrender," Trump told him. Maduro gambled, and now he's in a New York federal courthouse pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges that were drawn up 5 years ago. That's been dusted off and deployed the moment it became a politically convenient tool to wield. But here seems the real question: why now? Why, after years of sanctions, after the failed 2019 recognition of Juan Guaido as interim president, after Operation Gideon flopped in 2020, why suddenly go full bin Laden raid on a sovereign head of state? Let me walk you through what's really happening here, because the official narrative is designed to make you stupid. Venezuela didn't become a target because Maduro is a power-drunk authoritarian figure. We're allied with Saudi Arabia, which is a seemingly good instance to use in this case. Venezuela became a target because it broke the rules of the petrodollar system. The same system that's kept America afloat since 1974, when Kissinger cut that deal with the Saudis. You price oil in dollars, we share with you our finest military protection and sell you all the weapons you want. It's a beautiful con. Every nation needs energy, and as a result of it every nation needs dollars, so every nation buys U.S. Treasury bonds, which means we can print money without the inflation consequences that would destroy anyone else. That's the exorbitant privilege Americans have been enjoying for a long while. That's why we've been able to run deficits that would collapse any other economy. And Venezuela started selling oil in yuan to China, and in euros to Europe, anything but dollars. To add, they joined BRICS as a partner nation in 2024, got access to the alternative payment systems, CIPS, no longer SWIFT, and they made it very clear they were done playing by Washington's hegemonistic rules. So let's review the playbook because you've seen this before. In 2002, coup attempt against Chavez. He's briefly ousted, then restored when the military refuses to comply. Declassified documents later show U.S. foreknowledge, support, the whole deal. In 2014 through 2017, sanctions, targeted first, then comprehensive. The Treasury freezes Venezuelan assets. No access to international financial systems. You want to see how economic warfare works? Watch Venezuela's GDP contract by 75% over a decade. In 2019, Juan Guaido, who nobody outside opposition circles had heard of, declares himself interim president, and within hours, the U.S. recognizes him.
Juro asumir formalmente las competencias del Ejecutivo Nacional como el presidente encargado de Venezuela. Para lograr el cese de la usurpación, un gobierno de transición y tener elecciones libres. Si así lo hiciere, que Dios y la patria lo premien, sino que os condenen.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on TV saying Maduro's gotta go. It's regime change without the invasion, just acting out the same script as Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Finally, in 2020, came Operation Gideon, and this is where it gets fucking fascinating. 8 guys, 2 of them ex-Green Berets, Luke Denman and Aaron Berry, pile into speedboats from Colombia thinking they're gonna pull off some ingloriously bastardized show. Land at Macuto, seize the airport, capture Maduro, install Guaido, boom, a regime change. It went exactly as well as you'd expect. Venezuelan forces were waiting on the beach. 8 dead in the firefight, dozens captured. The 2 Americans involved were paraded on state TV.
Securing the sector, establishing outer security, communicating with the tower, bringing in planes, one of which includes one to put Maduro on and take him back to the United States. Because I didn't feel that that was the case, I was helping Venezuelans take back control of their country. And the instructions that I received from Jordan was to ensure that we took control of an airport for safe passage for Maduro and receiving of airplanes.
The guy who organized it, in the name of Jordan Gaudreau, a former 10th Special Forces group, running a private military company called Silvercorp USA out of Florida. And I want you to sit with this for a second because it's important. Gaudreau's lawyers later claimed he was recruited by Keith Schiller, Trump's longtime bodyguard, and that the operation had authority from the highest levels of the executive branch. Guaido signed a contract, $213 million, that was contingent on future Venezuelan oil revenues, in order to hire Silvercorp for strategic planning, equipment procuring, project execution advice. The goal, spelled out in black and white, was to capture, detain, remove Nicolas Maduro. Now, Guaido's people later disavowed it, said they never funded it, called it a false flag. But Gaudreau released audio and video of conference calls with Guaido and his advisors. The contract has Guaido's signature as well, and nobody's been yet to be charged with forgery. And when Operation Gideon went sideways, those 2 Americans were rotting in Venezuelan prison. You know what the CIA did. According to Jack Murphy, a former Ranger who reported on this, the CIA warned Silvercorp not to go through with it multiple times. Think about that, the CIA knew. They told Gaudreau to stand down and he went anyway, probably chasing the $1 million bounty that the Director of Justice had put on Maduro's head. Well, that's the discount version, the shitshow version. The version where political will isn't actually behind the operation, so you get mercenaries with delusions of grandeur trying their hands on profiteering off of a chaotic cause instead of actual strategic assets. But 2026 is different. This time they sent full-suited operators. See, there's a reason you've hardly heard of the guys who actually pulled this off. There's a reason Delta Force doesn't have a Netflix series and Hollywood consultants. You don't hear some guys on Joe Rogan podcast talking about that one time in Caracas. Because when America needs something done and it's imperative that they can't leave fingerprints, the one that absolutely has to work with almost 0% failure rate, they don't send the guys we know about, they send the unit. Let's talk about who actually runs these operations because the mythology matters here. Everyone knows the SEALs, they're America's celebrity commandos. Rob O'Neill shot Bin Laden, wrote a book about it, went on every talk show and ended up becoming a social media personality. The Navy SEALs have movie franchises, they have brandings. Hell, you can take a SEAL training experience vacation if you've got the money. Now name one Delta Force operator. You can't because you're not supposed to. Navy SEAL Selection BUDS is a 6 months of hell routine. Cold, wet, exhausted, and broken, with a 75% attrition rate, it creates warriors with incredible physical resilience, there's no questioning that. But here's the thing, you can go to BUDS straight from the fleet. You can be 19 years old, pass the physical standards, and get a shot. Delta doesn't work like that. You can't even attempt Delta selection unless you're already in Special Forces or Ranger Regiment with years of downrange experience. You need to be a proven operator before they'll even have a look at you. The selection course isn't about breaking you physically, though it will. It's mainly about psychological assessment under impossible conditions. They take you into the Appalachian Mountains. A 40-pound rucksack with a map, a compass, a series of coordinates you need to navigate over dozens of miles of brutal terrain. No sleep and minimal food. And the whole time they're watching how you think, how you problem solve when your body is screaming at you to quit. How you handle isolation, ambiguity, and failure. The pass rate is 10%, sometimes less. And the ones who make it through operate under JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, which means their missions are classified at levels most people in the military will never see. They're based at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. Their commander's identity is classified. Their roster is classified. Their operations are classified. Which is exactly why, when you need to grab a sitting head of state from a fortified military compound in the capital of a hostile nation without starting World War III, you send Delta. Here's how it went down, based on information that's being pieced together from public statements and reporting. August 2025, CIA sends a small advance team into Venezuela. Their job, extraordinary insight into Maduro's life, where he sleeps, what he eats, his routines, his security patterns. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said they even knew about his pets. That's the level of intelligence penetration we're talking about. Months of training, Delta operators and the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, the helicopter pilots, train on a replica of Maduro's compound. Same layout, fortifications, and steel doors to his safe room. They practice with what Trump called massive blowtorches in case they need to cut through reinforced walls. It's the exact same method they used for bin Laden in 2011. Build a replica, rehearse until it's muscle memory, so when you're actually downrange with bullets flying, you're operating on brain autopilot. September to December 2025, the pressure campaign. Trump's armada sinking drug boats in the Caribbean, 35 vessels, 114 people dead.
The U.S. Coast Guard is interdicting another sanctioned vessel in international waters off Venezuela. The operation carried out by the same type of elite tactical operations team that boarded an oil tanker 10 days ago. President Trump has ordered what he calls a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. At least 15 sanctioned tankers full of oil are floating off Venezuela and could be targeted if they enter international waters, experts say. A move that would choke Venezuela's oil exports, the lifeblood of President Maduro's regime, which President Trump is calling a foreign terrorist organization. Maduro calling the U.S. actions criminal piracy, and Maduro ally Russia saying the U.S. is now threatening international shipping in the Caribbean.
We've always expected them to provide rhetorical support for the Maduro regime.
This week, House Republicans rejected resolutions that would have forced the Trump administration to seek authorization from Congress if military action moved to Venezuelan soil.
Mr. President, will you be seeking any authorization from Congress for any land attacks on cartels in Venezuela?
For anyone?
For any land attacks on drug cartels in Venezuela?
I wouldn't mind telling him, but it's not a big deal. I don't have to tell him; it's been proven. But I wouldn't mind at all.
The U.S. military has now also conducted 28 strikes on alleged drug boats, killing more than 100 people. But the administration has yet to provide any public evidence of drug smuggling.
The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, parks off Venezuela's coast. More than 15,000 U.S. troops in the region. The message is clear: we're coming for you. 1 week before the raid, Trump calls Maduro directly. You got to surrender, he says. December, before Christmas, Trump approves the operation. January 3, 2026, by 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time, Trump gives the final order. Good luck and Godspeed. 150 aircraft launch from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere. B-1B bombers, F-22 Raptors, F-35s, F-A-18 Super Hornets, EA-18 Growler electronic attack planes, E-2 Hawkeyes surveillance drones, It was a site that looked like the whole Darkseid the Conqueror package, the largest American military operation in Latin America since the 1989 invasion of Panama. At 2 a.m. local time, the helicopters touched down at Maduro's compound. Delta breaches blow the doors. Maduro and his wife are in their residence, completely taken by surprise, Kane said. Maduro tries to make it to his safe room, the reinforced steel bunker he probably thought would save him, but he doesn't get there in time. Delta operators have him and Flores in custody within minutes. A firefight erupts. One American helicopter takes damage but stays operational. Several U.S. troops are injured, no casualties recorded. 3:30 a.m. local time, U.S. forces are wheels up, exfiltrating. Maduro and Flores are aboard the USS Iwo Jima. 4:29 a.m., Trump posts on Truth Social and other social media platforms like X shows a photo of Maduro blindfolded in a tracksuit, hands zip-tied. 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time that same day, Maduro lands at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York. Dozens of law enforcement escort him off the plane. He's shipped to a federal jail to trial on drug trafficking charges which he made a not guilty plea. 25 and a half hours. That's how long it took from wheels up in Caracas to Maduro in an American jail. This was a sitting president of a sovereign nation being extracted by force, flown to the United States, and put on trial using an indictment from 2020 that was sitting in a drawer waiting for the right political moment. The international law community is losing its mind. Chatham House, one of the most respected foreign policy institutions in the world, called it a significant violation of Venezuelan sovereignty and the UN Charter. But Trump doesn't care about international law, he cares about the results, and on that front it's a flawless execution, mission accomplished. But if you think this was about catching a drug trafficker, then you haven't been paying attention. Because while everyone's focused on the raid itself, the tactical brilliance, they're missing the bigger picture. This was about sending a message to every nation on Earth. Well, it's mostly the Western Hemisphere that's been quietly building an alternative to American financial dominance. And that message, simply put, we're not done yet. Alright, zoom out with me. In November 2025, something happened that most people completely missed. China issued $4 billion worth of bonds denominated in US dollars, which at that moment looked like a routine financial transaction, right? Except when the orders came in, they totaled $118 billion, 30 times oversubscribed. Global investors were trampling each other to buy Chinese government debt. And the part that should terrify anyone in Washington is that those Chinese bonds started trading at lower yields than US Treasury bonds. Global investors were accepting lower returns on Chinese debt than on American debt, despite China having a lower credit rating. In the hierarchy of global finance, this is like a knockoff brand outselling Coca-Cola at a higher price. It doesn't happen, it's not supposed to be possible. But it is happening because the financial architecture that has kept America dominant for 50 years is cracking. According to IMF data, the dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 65.3% in 2016 to 59.3% by Q3 2024. That might sound modest, 6 percentage points over 8 years, but in the world of reserve currencies, that's a fucking sprint. For context, the British pound's decline from dominance took 40 years, from 1913 to the 1950s. The dollar's losing ground faster, and modern financial infrastructure, digital payment systems, bilateral swap arrangements, central bank digital currencies could compress that timeline even more dramatically. Meanwhile, China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, their alternative to SWIFT, processed an average of 9.6 trillion yuan daily in 2024. That's 65% year-over-year growth. It now connects over 1,700 financial institutions across 180 countries. Translation: countries are building the plumbing that will come handy to trade without dollars. And Venezuela was right in the nexus of the quagmire. They had been selling oil to China in yuan since the sanctions started tightening. Further, they became a BRICS partner nation in 2024, which gave them access to alternative payment systems like the CIPS, development loans from the new development bank, and most importantly, political cover from the two superpowers actively working to dilute America's dominance. Russia sealed a strategic partnership with Venezuela in October 2025 as regards energy, mining, transport, security cooperation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov coordinated with Venezuela's foreign minister on guaranteeing state sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs. They discussed arms deliveries. Iran reportedly established drone manufacturing facilities on Venezuelan soil. Chinese companies poured billions upon billions into Venezuela's energy sector in order to facilitate and secure oil shipments for decades. With all of these, there's but one peculiar reason why Washington couldn't tolerate any of it. The fear isn't just Venezuela, it's the precedent. If Venezuela succeeds as a BRICS partner in America's traditional sphere of influence right in the fucking backyard Monroe Doctrine territory, then what's stopping Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Brazil from doing the same thing? Brazil's already a full BRICS member and conducts 25–30% of its China trade in local currencies. Argentina, despite Milei's pivot, still repays IMF debts in RMB. A 2025 Bank of China survey found 77% of ASEAN businesses now prefer RMB financing for trade with China. If Venezuela had stayed defiant, firm in power, and continued de-dollarizing, it would have been proof of concept that you can challenge American financial hegemony and thrive. So they made an example out of Maduro. Of course, not through economic sanctions because those weren't working fast enough. Not through supporting opposition as well, it was through Guaido, a joke who never had popular legitimacy. And they did it the old-fashioned way with an overwhelming military force. 150 aircraft, Delta Force, the Night Stalkers, the CIA and DEA, the full machinery of American power descended on Caracas like the wrath of God, grabbing a head of state and hauling him back to New York in chains. Trump stood at Mar-a-Lago and said, quote, "We're going to run it essentially until
Late
such
last
time
night
as a proper transition
and
can
early
take place."
today,
He's talking about Venezuela like it's a subsidiary or some private equity acquisition. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said they're enforcing an oil quarantine and restructuring how the oil industry operates for the benefit of the people. Right, for the benefit of American oil companies who Trump explicitly said will be going in and modernizing Venezuela's production facilities, investing billions using that money in Venezuela. Whose Venezuela is it exactly then, because the Venezuelan people didn't vote for this? Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, the opposition figure the U.S. recognizes as the legitimate winner of the 2024 election, said Maduro's removal was an important step but not enough. Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2025 for leading the opposition, called for Gonzalez to be installed as president. But Trump said he hasn't been in contact with Machado, calling her a very nice woman who doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. Instead, he's working with Delcy Rodriguez y Maduro's vice president, who was sworn in as interim president after Maduro was captured. Think about that for a second. We just conducted a military raid to remove an authoritarian dictator, and the person we're working with to transition the country is his vice president, the person who was part of his administration. It's your typical regime change with its spearheaded goal being nothing but geopolitical compliance. You force them to bend the knee while the rest of the world watch. Cuba reported 32 Cubans, military and intelligence personnel, were killed in the operation. Russia's calling it brutal aggression. China's calling it a violation of sovereignty. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro, who's been targeted by Trump for allegedly being in the pocket of drug cartels, accused Washington of abducting Maduro without legal basis. Trump's response when asked if Colombia could be next was, "It sounds good to me." To emphasize much more, he's not joking. The 2025 U.S. National Security Strategy, the document that outlines America's strategic vision, includes something called the Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It explicitly states that the Western Hemisphere is of special significance to U.S. security, and Washington will use force to maintain that sphere of influence. Translation: anyone in Latin America who gets too close to China or Russia is now a potential target, and oil's the weapon they're going to use. Venezuela has 303 billion barrels of proven reserves, 5 times what Saddam and Gaddafi controlled combined. U.S. sanctions cost Venezuela an estimated $226 billion in lost oil revenue between 2017 and 2024. That's 213% of their GDP just gone. Now imagine those barrels coming back online under U.S. control. Analysts are predicting it'll take a decade to rebuild production capacity, requiring hundreds of billions in investment. But when it happens, American oil companies will deliberately crash global prices to cripple OPEC Plus, to kneecap Russia's economy, to undermine any country still resisting financial integration with the West. Cornelia Mayer, an energy economist, told Al Jazeera that even a full return of Venezuelan barrels would be less than 1% of global supply. Markets would absorb it, not be flooded. So if you're sitting there thinking, why should I care about some military operation in South America, you're asking the wrong question. This isn't on Venezuela alone. It's about what kind of world we're living in, what kind of precedents are being set for the next 100 years, and who will actually benefit or get burnt from all this in the long run. Those sanctions on Venezuela contributed to global oil price spikes that you felt every time you filled up your tank. The broader dedollarization movement is continuous inflation, interest rates that stay high, a standard of living that gradually but continually erodes the middle class pretty much most of the time because the dollar can't maintain its purchasing power if the world stops needing it. The military operations, even the secret ones, are heavily funded by your tax dollars. The 2026 defense budget is projected to exceed $1 trillion for the first time. That's a 13% jump from 2025, and where's all of that money going? Drones, cyber warfare, and special ousting operations like the one we just saw in Caracas. But there's this thing none of us wants to admit: it's not working. China's building infrastructure across 3 continents through Belt and Road. Russia's modernized its military and proven it can operate in denied environments. While BRICS nations are trading in local currencies and the dollar's share of global reserves keeps dropping. We're watching the late stage of an empire that's trying to maintain dominance through sheer force because it can't compete economically anymore. Our infrastructure's crumbling, our manufacturing's hollowed out, political systems paralyzed. So what do we do in response to the sorry state of affairs? We send the night stalkers to grab heads of state in the middle of the night because that's all we have left. Venezuela is the warning. Not because of what we did, because of how easily we did it. There was no congressional approval nor coalition of allies to legitimize the cause. It was just all Trump giving the order, Delta executing it flawlessly, and Maduro sitting in a New York jail within 24 hours. This explicitly confirms the action of an empire that's terrified of losing control. The question isn't whether the American century is ending. The question is how violent the transition is going to be and whether we, regular people just trying to live our lives, have any say in it. Because right now, while we're arguing about culture wars, border politics, whatever manufactured outrage is trending, the tectonics of global power is being shifted and the laws rewritten. These are trade agreements we will never vote on. Military operations we'll never hear about until they're already done. Financial systems being built to replace the one our economy currently depends on. Venezuela is the blueprint and not the exception. And if you think this stops with Maduro, again, you haven't been paying attention. Trump's already talking about Colombia. He's talking about running Venezuela indefinitely. He's talking about the Donroe Doctrine, his version of Monroe, where the entire Western Hemisphere is America's to control. China is watching, Russia is watching. Every nation that's been quietly building alternatives to dollar dominance is watching. And they're asking themselves the same question: are we the next in line? If you are listening right now and enjoyed this piece, and you believe true stories and facts of our modern world deserve to be heard, help spread the word and click subscribe on our channel to find more relatable contents.